Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a chaotic stack of sources, your articles, your research, your notes, and well, we try to give you the distilled knowledge you need to be instantly well-informed.
And today, if you're looking to get a quick but uh, really thorough understanding of one of cinema's weirdest and most wonderful subgenres, you're definitely in the right place.
We are plunging into the 1980s.
Specifically, the era of horror films that couldn't quite decide if they wanted to make you scream or laugh out loud.
And the benchmark for this whole dive is the 1985 classic House. It's a film that has found this huge new audience on streaming lately.
And it's so easy to see why.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of a cult film that uses these amazing inventive practical effects, and it's just completely irreverent. It's this really weird blend of drama and sheer absurdity.
And that unique, chaotic energy is exactly what we're focused on today. Our sources argue that House wasn't, an anomaly. It was really the perfectly blended result of a specific moment in cinema.
So our mission is to explore 6 films from that same era that share House's particular DNA.
Right, the high energy, the gross-out practical effects, and that successful fusion of genres.
We're going to help you understand the structural and historical significance of these movies. Okay, so let's unpack this, starting with the films that truly, truly push the boundaries of genre blending.
We can begin with 1988's Dead Heat. The genius of this film, I think, lies in its high-concept pitch.
What happens when you decide the mainstream buddy cop genre?
A total cash cow genre.
Yeah, needs to be smashed headfirst into a horror plot with reanimated corpses.
It has that immediate, fun, high-octane setup. You've got Treat Williams as Detective Roger Mortis.
Which is a great name, by the way.
The best name. And Joe Piscopo is Detective Doug Bigelow. They're working LAPD homicide. They start investigating a jewelry store robbery, which sounds totally standard.
Right, until they discover the robbers aren't just bulletproof, they're, kind of rotting.
Because their corpses, of course, brought back by this mysterious resurrection machine. What's historically fascinating about Dead Heat is how it tries to legitimize its B-movie roots through its casting.
You see that immediately with the star power. It features one of the final performances of the legendary Vincent Price.
And Darren McGavin is the main antagonist.
Exactly. Putting established stars like that into a movie about zombie buddy cops was a very specific strategy of the 80s. You use familiar faces to signal that the film, despite all the gore, is in on the joke.
It's paying homage.
It's paying homage. So moving on, if we're talking about pushing the physical limits of effects, we absolutely have to talk about 1986's From Beyond.
Oh, yeah. This is a must-watch for its commitment to the Gooey.
This was director Stuart Gordon's follow-up to Reanimator.
So he went right back to the well of H.P. Lovecraft, loosely adapting another one of his stories, and he reunited Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, which gives it that same familiar, frenetic energy.
And that energy really centers on this piece of experimental tech called the resonator. Combs plays a scientist, Crawford Tillinghast, and he's working on a machine designed to stimulate the pineal gland.
Which is often called the third eye.
Right. But what exactly happens when you stimulate that gland with a giant humming machine?
Well, it allows the people exposed to it to see creatures from an alternate dimension that, exist just outside of our normal human perception.
Okay, so that's the technical nugget right there. The resonator doesn't just make the creatures visible.
No, it makes them physical. It destabilizes reality just enough for these unseen dimensional horrors to manifest and interact with the humans.
Usually by consuming them.
Often by consuming them. And that need for physical interaction meant the effects budget was huge. The sources all emphasize that From Beyond required no fewer than 4 separate effects teams working at the same time.
Wow. The cast and crew have talked about how difficult it was to film because they were constantly surrounded by prosthetics, demanding makeup, complex creature mechanics.
And that level of dedication to physical, grotesque effects really defines this specific pocket of 80s cinema.
So the first 2 films were about these external forces, zombies, alternate dimensions. But you really can't talk about 80s genre fusion without diving into body horror that turns inward.
Right, the kind that explores social anxiety through physical transformation.
Which brings us neatly to Brian Yuzna's directorial debut, 1989's Society.
Society is such a fascinating outlier because of its trajectory. It was a massive cult hit in Europe almost immediately, but the U.S. release was significantly delayed.
Why was that?
It seems like the distributors just weren't sure how to market something this bizarre.
It starts as this classic teenage paranoia movie, right?
Right.
We follow Bill Whitney. He's an outsider in his wealthy Beverly Hills social circle, and it kind of subverts your expectations before it pivots hard into real social commentary.
And the fundamental anxiety here, the thing the horror represents, is late 80s anxiety about class disparity, but made literal, made physical.
So the slow burn hinges on Bill discovering this shocking truth.
That the upper class is quite literally feeding off the lower class in these surreal, grotesque rituals. The horror isn't just random. It's a physical manifestation of consumption and exploitation.
And that payoff is just spectacular. The climax is famous.
It is.
That final scene, created by the effects legend Screaming Mad George, is consistently cited as maybe the single most inventive and extreme effects sequence of the entire decade. It's what cemented the film's cult status.
Screaming Mad George actually coined a term for that finale. He called it shunting, where bodies just melt and merge and twist into this one singular fleshy mass.
It's so repulsive but completely unforgettable. It's a visual spectacle that makes you wonder what kind of brainstorming session even led to that specific design.
That is the chaotic imagination we were looking for.
So now we can transition to part two. Films that were defined by high energy, high self-awareness, and some truly iconic performances. Let's start with a foundational text here. 1985's The Return of the Living Dead.
Directed by Dan O'Bannon, this is just a masterclass in self-awareness. It doesn't just pay homage to the zombie genre, it actively subverts it and embraces its B-movie roots with this great punk rock aesthetic.
And crucially, it gives us a whole new set of zombie rules. It follows these two warehouse employees, Frank and Freddy, who accidentally release a dangerous chemical.
What I love is the self-referential parody. Frank, who's played by James Karen, gives this whole backstory that explicitly ties the events to Night of the Living Dead.
Right. He basically says that movie was based on a true story, and this is the real sequel.
And in doing that, they completely change the rules of engagement. The zombies, designed by special effects artist William Stout, are fast, they're highly detailed, and, most terrifyingly, they don't die from headshots.
They are relentless, and they specifically crave one thing.
Brains.
Brains. The ability to communicate and that desire for brains, which supposedly dulls the pain of being dead, made them a totally new kind of threat. It created this instant panic and tension that the older, slower zombie films just couldn't muster.
It's a genre shift born from just wanting to be different.
And the decision to make the zombies talk and strategize.
Yeah, that adds a level of black humor that perfectly matches the chaotic energy we were talking about with House.
Okay, moving on to another 1985 success that absolutely nailed that balancing act. Fright Night.
Tom Holland's directorial debut. And it's a film that manages to blend genuine scares with laughs,
Yeah.
all grounded by really superb practical effects.
This is a classic homage to the old Universal monsters, but filtered through an 80s lens.
Exactly. You got the teenager, Charlie Brewster, who suspects his mysterious new neighbor, Jerry Dandridge, is a vampire. When no one believes him, he turns to the one person he thinks can help.
His personal hero, the washed-up late-night TV horror host, Peter Vincent.
And as the sources note, Peter Vincent's name is a total nerd detail. It's an ode to horror titans Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. It links the film directly to its inspirations.
But I have to ask, doesn't the decision to make the only person who believes the teenager a washed-up, cowardly actor, doesn't that undermine the horror a little bit?
That is a fantastic point, but that's precisely where the humor works so well. The vampires themselves, the creatures, their transformations, they are never the joke.
Right, they're genuinely gruesome.
They are top-tier effects work, which keeps the stakes high. The humor comes exclusively from the human characters' reactions to that supernatural reality, particularly Peter Vincent's escalating, terrified ineptitude.
So it keeps the comedy grounded in character, which in turn makes the horror land even harder.
Exactly. Which brings us to a film that is often regarded as the essential template for this entire hybrid genre.
Evil Dead Second from 1987.
You cannot talk about chaotic 80s horror without talking about Ash Williams.
Not at all.
This is a film that cemented the horror comedy structure, and its origin story is almost as chaotic as Ash's adventures. We know it effectively remakes and surpasses the original Evil Dead, but the reason for that remake stems entirely from a massive legal headache.
Tell us more about that technical constraint, because that dictated the entire flow of the film.
So when the original Evil Dead was released, Sam Raimi and Robert Tappert, the producers, they sold the distribution rights individually to dozens of independent, tiny studios all over the world.
Wow, okay.
So when it came time to greenlight a sequel, The costs and the sheer complexity of trying to track down and buy back all those fragmented distribution rights were just prohibitive.
So they couldn't just start the sequel where the last one left off?
Precisely. To bypass those legal issues, they decided the cheapest and quickest solution was to just reshoot all the necessary sequences from the original film.
Ash arriving at the cabin, discovering the Necronomicon.
The first transformation, all of it.
Yeah.
And then just amplify everything. It turned a legal hurdle into a huge creative leap.
And Bruce Campbell returns as Ash Williams, leaning fully into this demanding, iconic physical performance. But it's not just Campbell. The film is equally memorable for Sam Raimi's signature directorial style.
Oh, absolutely. The Sam Raimi cam, that exaggerated shaky cam, the incredibly fast zooms, the dynamic POV shots that represent the demonic forces, all of it builds a genuine sense of tension and panic.
That style allowed the crew to visually externalize Ash's deteriorating psychological state while also delivering slapstick physical comedy.
It's that unique combination of technical constraints leading to creative solutions that really defines the chaotic joy of the entire Evil Dead franchise.
It absolutely does. Okay, so we've covered 6 incredible films that capture the unique tone of House, but now we have to turn to the critical debate that came up in the source materials commentary.
And this is where it gets really interesting.
Our sources challenge the fundamental premise of a list like this. What actually qualifies a film as a cult classic in the first place?
This transition is so crucial because the sources present two completely conflicting viewpoints, and the difference is really rooted in the film's financial performance.
The first one, often considered the stricter definition, is the box office failure viewpoint.
Right. And that perspective argues that true cult status is earned only by movies that were initially critically panned or just outright flopped at the box office, but then later developed this dedicated, substantial fan base.
You know, through midnight screenings and that sort of thing?
Exactly. The premise is that a cult following has to be built against the mainstream current. If a movie was a hit right out of the gate, it's not a cult classic, it's just a successful classic. They cite examples like Donnie Darko, which struggled at first, as fitting this stricter model.
So the counter-argument, the classic success viewpoint, disputes this rigid definition entirely. It says that successful, widely known films that gained a huge following immediately, like Poltergeist or Gremlins,
Or even The Terminator.
can still be considered cult because of their specific aesthetic or their thematic depth or just the intensity of their fan base, even if they were blockbusters.
So when we apply this debate to the films we just discussed, the definition gets extremely messy. Evil Dead 2, for instance, was both critically acclaimed and a box office success.
So by that strict failure definition, it would be the antithesis of a cult classic.
Completely.
So that's why clarity is needed. Which definition do films like Society or Dead Heat fit?
Well, those films, Society and Dead Heat, are often identified by commenters as being less widely known and less financially successful at first, meaning they probably fit that traditional cult definition a little better. Their discovery was more word of mouth.
So what does this all mean for our deep dive? The article's underlying perspective, which ultimately dictated its selections, was not about box office failure at all.
No, it was focused on finding films from the same era as House that share a specific thematic DNA.
Horror that incorporates heavy humor, campiness, and extreme inventive practical effects.
And that thematic mission is why films like Evil Dead 2 are included, despite their success. They embody that irreverent visual style and the willingness to completely blend genres that define this subgenre. The lesson for you, the learner, is that sometimes the structure of a film is more important than the success of its release.
It's clear that the shared DNA of all these films is that combination of inventive pre-CGI practical effects, the work of effects geniuses like Screaming Mad George and William Stout,
combined with a genuinely irreverent attitude toward established genre rules.
And that combination is a uniquely 80s phenomenon. The limitations of the technology forced creativity. When you couldn't rely on digital polish, you had to rely on time-consuming physical staging, puppets, all those hours in makeup, intense visual choreography.
The necessity of those physical effects defined the look and feel of cult cinema for an entire generation.
And that necessity is why the humor works so well. You can laugh at the absurdity of the situation in Dead Heat, but the zombie standing in front of you is a physically built, palpable threat. You're laughing at the juxtaposition of the comedy and the genuine visceral gore.
And it leaves us with this final thought. Think about the relationship between gore and laughter. Modern horror often uses comedy to diffuse tension after a scare, but these 80s films often use the humor during the most extreme, time-consuming physical effects sequences.
So does the fact that they had to physically build these grotesque scenarios give them a more tactile, memorable, and lasting presence in cult cinema than any quick digital effect could achieve?
It's something for you to mull over the next time you find yourself watching a detective turn into a rapidly decomposing zombie.